All right, chapter 18, A Flood of Sunshine. And remember when last we left Demi and Hester, he had passively aggressively, said that he couldn't possibly go alone and asked her to go, and she said that she would go with him. Arthur Dimmesdale gazed into Hester's face with a look in which hope and joy shone out. Wow, that's not something that we typically see from Dimmy. Indeed, but with fear betwixt them, and a kind of horror at her boldness, who had spoken what he vaguely hinted at, but dared not speak. This gives us good characterization and a difference between Hester and Dimmesdale, and kind of how they're going to respond to things. And he is surprised at her boldness, her brashness, her confidence. But Hester Prynne, with a mind of native courage and activity, and again we've got that word native, so kind of a natural thing, and for so long a period not merely estranged but outlawed from society, had habituated herself to such latitude of speculation as was altogether foreign to the clergyman. And so this is a comment on what it's like to be outside of society rather than inside, that she kind of can have that boldness because they have sent her away, whereas he's still looking for a little bit of approval. She had wandered without rule or guidance in a moral wilderness, as vast, as intricate, as shadowy as the untamed forest. So we're getting connection with that natural imagery again. Amid the gloom of which they were now holding colloquy that was to decide their fate. This is just like talking together, just in case you need a definition. Her intellect and heart had their home, as it were, in desert places, where she roamed as freely as the wild Indian in his woods. So she's being characterized as like Native Americans or First Nations, etc. For years past, she had looked from this estranged point of view at human institutions and whatever priests and legislators had established, criticizing with all with hardly more reverence than the Indian would feel for the clerical band, the judicial robe, the pillory, the gallows, the fireside, or the church. So with distance, we become critical, that we can only see these problems in society when we are somehow separated from them. The tendency of her fate and fortunes had been to set her free, and notice that is a positive word there. The scarlet letter was her passport into regions where other women dared not tread. Shame, despair, solitude, these had been her teachers, stern and wild ones. They had made her strong, but had taught her much amiss. So we are seeing that it's got this double purpose, that it has both freed her from society, but also taught her the wrong things. And so we have to recognize that she's getting something different from Pearl because of this. Because of her scarlet letter. It's a passport into these regions beyond those other places, but also these problems, this shame, despair, and solitude have been a big problem and taught her the wrong things. The minister, on the other hand, had never gone through an experience calculated to lead him beyond the scope of generally received laws. And so this is something that we like, is going beyond the scope of generally received laws. Although, in a single instance, he had so fearfully transgressed as one of the most sacred of them. But this had been a sin of passion, not of principle or even of purpose. And that sets this particular type of sin apart from some others he's just acting on kind of his natural. That passion thing is relatively natural versus principle, doing it on purpose or purpose. So it's kind of accidental. Since that wretched epoch, he had watched with morbid zeal and minuteness, not his acts, for those it was easy to arrange, but each breath of emotion and his every thought. So he's overthinking potentially his own internal world. At the head of the social system, as the clergyman of that day stood, he was only the more trammeled by its regulations, its principles, and even its prejudices. As a priest, the framework of his order inevitably hemmed him in. So he is potentially even more within society than anybody else, because he's kind of at the head of it. As a man who had once sinned, but who had kept his conscience all alive and painfully sensitive by a feeling of an unhealed wound, he might have been supposed safer within the line of virtue than if he had never sinned at all. So his actions, so safer within the line of virtue, his actions are A-okay. In fact, better than if he hadn't sinned. But we also have this unhealed wound. We know that wounds should heal over time, and that his have not. Thus, we seem to see that, as regarded Hester Prynne, the whole 7 years of outlaw and ignominy had been little other than a preparation for this very hour. So she's gone through all of this so that she can have the realization and leave. But Arthur Dimmesdale, were such a man once more to fall, what plea could be urged in extenuation of his crime? None, unless it avail him somewhat that he had broken down, that he was broken down by long and exquisite suffering, that his mind was darkened and confused by the very remorse which harrowed it. That between fleeing as an avowed criminal and remaining as a hypocrite, notice that these are his only two options. He either leaves as a criminal or remains as a hypocrite. Conscience might find it hard to strike the balance. Neither of those things are good. Whereas when Hester leaves, she has paid her debt. She has done what she needs to do. She has lived through it. So when she leaves, she's okay potentially. She has readied herself and considered society so much that she doesn't care anymore. That it was human to avoid the peril of death and infamy. Notice that it is human nature. And the inscrutable machinations of an enemy, that finally, to this poor pilgrim, on his dreary and desert path, faint, sick, miserable, there appeared a glimpse of human affection and sympathy. A new life, and a true one, in exchange for the heavy doom which he was now expiating. Paying for sins is really that one, if you need that one. And be the stern and sad-spoken truth that the breach which guilt had once made into the human soul is never, in this mortal state, repaired. So the way that he is, his wound can never heal. I know you can't read my handwriting there, but it may be watched and guarded, so that the enemy shall not force his way again into the citadel, and might even, in his subsequent assaults, select some other avenue in preference to that where he had formerly succeeded. But there is still the ruined wall, and near it the stealthy tread of the foe that would win over in his unforgotten triumph. You'll see lots and lots. We've seen enemy in this section a whole bunch of times, once on the other page, and a couple times here. Enemy and foe. So we're thinking devil, but we're also thinking in some ways letting the fact that he has let Chillingworth into his life so much is also, we can read this paragraph in both ways. The struggle, if there were one, need not be described. Let it suffice that the clergyman resolved to flee, and not alone. So they are going to go together and be happy. If in all these past 7 years, thought he, I could recall one instant of peace or hope, I would yet endure for the sake of that earnest of heaven's mercy. So here the problem is he doesn't, if he had had 1 second of peace, he would have thought maybe that heaven would forgive him, but he does not see heavenly forgiveness as a possibility either. But But now, since I am irrevocably doomed, there's no way to make up for his sin in his mind. Wherefore should I not snatch the solace allowed to the condemned culprit before his execution? Notice that we've got a couple pieces of alliteration here. The condemned culprit, snatch the solace. Or if this be the path to a better life, as Hester would persuade me, surely I surely give up no fairer prospect by pursuing it. Neither can I any longer live without her companionship. So powerful is she to sustain, so tender to soothe. So here he's looking outwardly for solace instead of internal forgiveness. He wants somebody else to make him feel good instead of trying to find that with himself. O thou to whom I dare not lift mine eyes, wilt thou yet pardon me? And so yet again, he's looking outside. He's looking to Hester and he's looking to God. He is not looking to himself for forgiveness, even though that's probably, it seems to be what Hawthorne's saying, is that's the only place that he could get it. Thou wilt go, said Hester calmly as he met her glance. The decision was made. A glow of strange enjoyment threw its flickering brightness over the trouble of his breast. So notice that we've got brightness over the trouble of his breast. So this is kind of like all of that light, dark stuff we were talking in the other chapter. And somehow some light now is getting to his breast, which we know is where there's some sign of his guilt and where he always grabs. So some sort of lightness now, goodness is hitting him in some ways. It was the exhilarating effect upon a prisoner just escaped from the dungeon of his own heart, of breathing the wild atmosphere of an unredeemed, unchristianized, lawless region. His spirit rose, as it were, with a bound and attained a nearer prospect of the sky. And there we go. He's getting closer to the sky, closer to the sun with his realization right now. Then throughout all the misery which had kept him groveling on the earth. Of a deeply religious temperament, there was inevitably a tinge of devotional in his mood. Do I feel joy again? Cried he, wondering at himself. Methought the germ of it was dead in me. Oh, Hester, thou art my better angel. I seem to have flung myself, sick, sin-stained, and sorrow-blackened, more alliteration there, down upon these forest leaves, and to have risen up all made anew, and with new powers to glorify him that hath been merciful. Now he's giving all of the credit to God. He's saying, "Oh, Hester," but he's also crediting God. So God and Hester get all of the credit for him feeling better. This is already the better life. Why did we not find it sooner? So he's finding that this feels good right now. Let us not look back, answered Hester Prynne. The past is gone. Wherefore should we linger upon it now? See, with this symbol, I undo it all and make it as if it had never been. So when we had talked about the symbol, we know that we're talking about her letter. So speaking, she undid the clasp that fastened the scarlet letter, and taking it from her bosom, threw it to a distance among the withered leaves. So after so long of saying that she couldn't remove it, nobody else could, she has of her own free will, right, removed it. And which we are going to take as a symbol of her kind of forgiving herself and letting go of it. The mystic token alighted on the hither verge of the stream. With a hand's breadth farther flight, it would have fallen into the water and given the little brook another woe to carry onward. And remember, we have that sad little brook that carries its troubles. Besides the unintelligible tale, which it still kept murmuring about. But there lay the embroidered letter, glittering like a lost jewel. We've seen lots of that jewel imagery before. But this one's lost. And remember that this reminds me a little bit of the miner, that when Chillingworth was like digging into Dimmy's heart for gold and jewels. And here it's a lost jewel because she has let it go, so nobody else can hurt her with it anymore. Nobody else can take that as a jewel anymore. Which some ill-fated wanderer might pick up. Oh, except see now it's since it's not gone, somebody else could still put it back onto her. And thenceforth be haunted by strange phantoms of guilt, sinkings of the heart, and unaccountable misfortune. So this could hurt somebody else by picking up guilt. So we don't want to pick up guilt, right? The stigma gone, Hester heaved a long, deep sigh in which the burden of shame and anguish departed from her spirit. So we notice that it's a burden, that it's something that one should not necessarily want to carry, certainly not as long as she has. Oh, exquisite relief! She had not known the weight until she felt freedom. By another impulse, she took off the formal cap that confined her hair, and down it fell upon her shoulders, dark and rich, with at once a shadow and light in its abundance, and imparting the charm of softness to her features. Remember, this is the fact that her hair was covered, was a loss of womanhood and femininity. So here, hair is symbolizing that femininity, that sexuality. I can't fit it all on here. You know what I mean? Femininity. And you notice that even in her hair, though, there's darkness and light in abundance. So it's this mixed nature. Nothing purely good, but nothing purely bad either. That it's kind of like the way that we saw that brook, sometimes going through the light and sometimes in shadow, and imparting the charm and of softness to her features. There played around her mouth and beamed out of her eyes a radiant and tender smile that seemed gushing from the very heart of womanhood. So if we weren't sure before, we've got this womanhood back, where nobody would ever have wanted to lay their head on her bosom in passion. We're getting that back. A crimson flush, oh, and we know how dim Dimsdale has been. Crimson flush, remember, that is passion and life and blood, right? Was glowing in her cheek that had been so long pale, like Dimmy. Her sex, her youth, and the whole richness of her beauty came back from what men call the irrevocable past, and clustered themselves with her maiden hope and a happiness before all the unknown within the magic circle of this hour. Do you remember the magic circle from from A Forest Walk? We had a magic circle of light that Hester couldn't get into. Now we have a magic circle again. And I do believe we run into the magic circle at least once, if not twice more. And as the gloom of the earth and sky had been but the effluence of these two mortal hearts, it vanished with their sorrow. So the gloom is vanishing all at once. As with a sudden smile of heaven, that alliteration is starting to make us kind of feel happy and sing-songy throughout this whole chapter. Forth burst the sunshine, pouring a very flood into the obscure forest, gladdening each green leaf, transmuting the yellow fallen ones to gold, and gleaming down the great trunks of the solemn trees. The objects that had been made a shadow hitherto, including Hester, embodied the brightness now. The course of the little brook might be traced by its merry gleam afar into the wood's heart of mystery, which had become a mystery of joy. So we're seeing the ease of which this light can come back, that she just needed to let go. And now all of that sunshine that she could not touch is hers again by letting go of this particular guilt. Such was the sympathy of nature. And so here we've got forgiveness, right? Nature is forgiving. That wild heathen nature of the forest, never subjugated by human law, nor illuminated by higher truth, with the bliss of these two spirits. Love, whether newly born or aroused from a death-like slumber, and that's what we're talking about here, is one that has been dead for a while, must always create sunshine. So there, if we were ever concerned about what that sunshine symbolized, now we know that that sunshine is love. So we think back to all of the times when Pearl was able to reach it and Hester wasn't, that potentially she was keeping herself from that love rather than something else. Filling the heart so full of radiance that it overflows upon the outward world. Had the forest still kept its gloom, it would have been bright in Hester's eyes and bright in Arthur Dimmesdale. This very much reminds me of Emerson and how nature reflects our moods. So where it was dark and gloomy before, now that they have kind of made a decision that makes them happy and they have love back again, everything is bright where it wasn't. Hester looked at him with a thrill of another joy. Thou must know Pearl, said she, our little Pearl. Thou hast seen her, yes, I know it. But thou wilt see her now with other eyes. So she is recognizing the absolute change that's happening. They are different people now. Their eyes are completely different. She is a strange child. I hardly comprehend her. But thou wilt love her dearly, as I do, and wilt advise me how to deal with her. I love this. It's still hard to deal with her. Because she is and really, can anybody be completely understood? And I think that that's where, where he's kind of coming from her, that she's strange and she's hard to understand. But that's how people are. Dost thou think the child will be glad to know me? Asked the minister, somewhat uneasily. I have long shrunk from children. And why would he have shrunk from children? Because they often show a distrust, a backwardness to be familiar with me. I have even been afraid of little Pearl. And here, when we think about this, we think of innocence and that the fact that children are innocent and that they often see more. So again, if we go back to, was it Emerson or Thoreau who said, if only I could be so wise as I was when I was born. And so, yet again, that's where he's recognizing that they see him for who he is, rather than his place in society. That was sad, answered her mother. But she will love thee dearly, and thou her. She is not far off. I will call her. Pearl, Pearl. I see the child, observed the minister. Yonder she is, standing in a streak of sunshine. Surprise, surprise, there's an alliterative streak of sunshine, making her yet again playful and happy and connected with love, right? A good way off on the other side of the brook. So thou thinkest the child will love me? Hester smiled and called again to Pearl, who was visible at some distance, as the minister had described her. Like a bright apparelled vision in a sunbeam, which fell down upon her through an arch of boughs. The ray quivered to and fro. Interesting quiver, right? Because that's quivering is usually associated with dimming. And here the ray is quivering, making her figure dim or distinct. Now like a real child, now like a child's spirit, as the splendor went and came again. So that darkness and light that consistently shimmers off and on, and with Hester's hair just recently. She heard her mother's voice and approached slowly through the forest. Pearl had not found the hour pass wearisomely while her mother sat talking with the clergyman. The great black forest, stern as it showed itself to those who brought the guilt and troubles of the world into its bosom. Oh, here's your contrast, right? That dark, that if you are guilty, it feels troublesome, became a playmate of the lonely infant, as well as it knew how. Somber as it was, it put on the kindest of its moods to welcome her. So again, that reflecting. It offered her the partridge berries, the growth of the preceding autumn, but ripening only in the spring, as now red drops of blood upon the withered leaves. And so here we've got these berries, but look at that, we go back to that same color symbolism, that red, that life, that blood, etc. These Pearl gathered, and was pleased with their wild flavor. The small denizens of the wilderness hardly took pains to move out of her path. Like all of the animals, she's very Snow White here. All of the animals kind of aren't running away from her, and she's able to just kind of pick things, and she is part of nature in a way that other people aren't. A partridge, indeed, with a brood of 10 ran behind her, ran forward threateningly, but soon repented of their fierceness, and clucked to her young ones not to be afraid, because she's part of them. A pigeon, alone on a low branch, allowed Pearl to come beneath, and uttered a sound as much of greeting as alarm. A squirrel, from the lofty depths of his domestic tree, chattered either in anger or merriment, for a squirrel is such a choleric and humorous little personage that it is hard to distinguish between his moods. I love that little image there. This humorous little person that's grumpy but funny in its own way, like a little old man, grumpy old man. So he chattered at the child and flung a nut upon her head. And notice that all of these things are natural. It is natural to be weird and that's not natural. It's natural to kind of be both scared and welcoming, and natural to be grumpy and humorous and everything like that, and moody. So he chattered at the child and flung a nut down upon her head. It was last year's nut, and already gnawed by his sharp tooth. A fox, startled from his sleep by her light footstep on the leaves, looked inquisitively at Pearl, as doubting whether it were better to steal off or to renew his nap in the same spot. A wolf, it is said, but here the tale is surely lapsed into the improbable. I love that he's kind of backtracking a little bit, like nature can only be so kind to even Pearl. Came up and smelt of Pearl's robe, and offered his savage head to be patted by her hand. The truth seems to be, however, that the mother forest. Oh, and I love that that hyphenated word, the mother forest. We are looking there at Mother Nature, etc., in the way that he's put that together. And these wild things which it nourished all recognized a kindred wildness in the human child. So now any of that oddness that we have seen from Pearl throughout is now explained. That she is wild and free and natural and different. And she was gentler here than in the grassy margined streets of the settlement or in her mother's cottage. And so recognizing that when she's among those like herself and outside of expectation, she can be herself and is actually more welcomed and more herself and gentler. The flowers appeared to know it, and one and another whispered as she passed, "Adorn thyself with me, thou beautiful child, adorn thyself with me." And, to please them, Pearl gathered the violets, the anemones, the columbines, and some twigs of the freshest green, which the old trees held down before her eyes. With these she decorated her hair, and her young waist, and became a nymph child. Oh, she is now a wood nymph, right? Or an infant dryad, or whatever else was in closest sympathy with the antique wood. In such guise had Pearl adorned herself, when she heard her mother's voice, and came slowly back. Slowly, for she saw the clergyman. Now we see some foreshadowing. That completely changed the mood, didn't it? That one last line. Especially being separated out that way, that she is happy and all covered in all of the greenery and flowers, and now she sees him, and and she slows down entirely. And there is our chapter.